Hey guys, I'm Scott Brown, the developer for the game Journey for the Crown, and I'm going to talk a bit about funding today. Now, I'm one to be quite biased, I think, in terms of how funding should be done. I believe funding should always start with you. And looking at all the different funding options out there, some of them do sound very appealing, and I hear so many different stories of pros and cons. And I'm just going to go through a variety of different funding options that might be available for you, and then you can assess what you think is best. All right, let me start off by discussing crowdfunding. Now, this is an option that you can do, and it's probably one of the most popular, and it's actually one of the hardest ones to pull off because it doesn't work so well anymore. A couple people have done it in the past in the developer community, and they've done really well. But from what I see, Kickstarter seems to be mostly about like D&D sets and cards and that sort of stuff. They do extremely well, and they always sell out their products. But in the indie developer community, I think a lot of people have been stung by horrible design games and unfinished work. And there's never really a good delivery of it. It's a gray area, I think. It doesn't work so well anymore, but if you have a serious reputation, I suppose you could pull that off. But as indie developers, we don't really have much of a reputation unless you've released something already. So a difficult one to do, but it's very, very popular if you can pull it off. You know, very low risk. Why not try it? Maybe you'll make a couple $1,000s if you have a low target, but you might be able to squeeze some money out of people, so it's always worth a try. I'll probably give it a go at some point in the future, and maybe it can help me pay for some of the music I put in my game. Now, the next one is grants. I've only seen one person out there actually get a grant, and they got the Epic Games grant. I know there are more, but personally, this is the only one I know that has received it. Grants are pretty popular. You know, everyone's trying to get one, but I think your chances of getting one of those is probably next to winning the lottery. So I don't want to give anyone's hopes up, but I mean, you could try for it, but it's going to be a toughie to get. I wouldn't be striving for that. There's probably a lot of work involved, filling out the forms and pitching your game to receive the grant. But they do come in different stages as well. You know, sometimes you can get just like a few $1,000s to upwards of 50,000. It really depends also on the level of game and how much you can pitch. So I think it's going to be one of those situational things that might be something you could achieve later in your development, but as a source of income or funding early in development, it's going to be a tough one to get. Now, one of the most popular ones is publishers. I'm going to also group in investors into this as well because they kind of fall into the same type of contracts that you're going to end up drawing up with a partnership like this. Now, typically you see numbers like 70 and 30% splits. I've seen different values as well depending on sort of the plan you guys conjure up. But it is probably the most popular one. And I've heard horror stories. I've heard great stories. You really got to take every scenario with a grain of salt and figure it out. I think as indie developers, we do get really screwed over the most by these publishers just because there's a lot of new up-and-coming ones, and those are the ones that seem to be interested in our products because they want to get their feet wet in the industry. They probably don't have all the experience. The bigger ones out there kind of get the higher-end indie games out there. So it is a tough area to really get funding in. I think a lot of the times in the early development too, there's no trust in us. It's completely backwards. Like for somebody out there to just, to trust in our idea, well, there's like a million idea guys out there. So it's really hard to get any focus at all from a publisher unless you got a prototype that looks pretty darn good. So I get contacted all the time by publishers. Most of them are probably some sort of Nigerian scammer. But, there are some legitimate ones out there. And, after I look at it, I kind of always peek at what they've done in the past because I want some reputation. But I know it's not exactly fair for me to do that to somebody. But, I mean, I'm so many years invested in this game for a publisher to just want to come in and jump in and get 30% after I've produced all this out of my own pocket. It doesn't seem fair for me to look at a publisher. However, if you're like a couple years into your project, it's not a bad deal to seek out a publisher. And maybe you can come up with some deals where they give you a little bit of money up front. That would be what I would be interested in. If they're willing to invest in you, now their investment needs to deliver, and they're going to make sure that if they just gave you some money, they want it back. They're not going to just do nothing. I think it's a decision you have to make early on, and you also have to be very careful through the contracts because you can get stung. And if you don't deliver, God forbid that happens to you, it could be a big nightmare financially for you. So I like the peace of mind of not having to deliver anything. Like, say I got hit by a truck tomorrow and I was killed. I got nothing to worry about. My life insurance takes over. My wife and family are taken care of. And I don't have this encroaching contract that's going to, haunt my wife and my kids. So I like that peace of mind. But for you guys out there, if you want to go down this route, seek out a publisher early. Maybe investigate several different ones, and don't just go with the first one that you see. Have a look around and make sure that you get a good contract, and maybe even get a lawyer involved if you can. Lawyers, they seem like they're really expensive, but for something like this, it might only cost you a couple grand to get a lawyer to skim through it and make sure that everything looks good and clean, and that you have an exit strategy if something goes bad. Now, the next thing I want to talk about are government grants. Now, these are pretty much everywhere. Every country's got a different version of it. And I'm from Canada. There's one called the Canadian Media Fund, which is it's a really big one. It's actually funded by the whole bunch of rich people at the top. Like, we're talking the 1% rich guys, like World Economic Forum crap. And I'm not a big fan of it. Unfortunately, I can't get any of it just because my story isn't written in an inclusive way. So these funding programs in my country typically want me to change my story to include, an indigenous main character, or maybe it's like a gender confused child or something like that. So there's some requirements involved that, unfortunately, I've already made my story. I don't really have any of this stuff. But if you read some of the fine print on this stuff, it's possible you could find some funding if that's the kind of road you want to go down. You might be able to find some funding. And I'm telling you, these guys have deep pockets. Like, I saw one game, they got $2 million in funding. And, they're delivering a game. I don't know how good it is. It might be a complete flop. I'm sure they'll probably file for bankruptcy just so they don't have to pay back the money. But, I mean, they got $2 million. If I had $2 million, what could I do with that? I could do tons of stuff. So, looking at the requirements, I did go through them all. It's pretty ridiculous. If you look at how our media in Canada is, our local television shows are pretty awful. I wouldn't want to watch one even if I was stuck in jail. But it is money in the end. You could take advantage of it. You do have to pitch it. They are going to take a lot of control over some of the aspects of your game. And I also believe that they do take a cut. But all that stuff would be discussed in the upcoming signing of this sort of grant. So look into it. Every country's got a different version out there. Maybe yours doesn't suck like ours does. But in the end, there's a story in Canada with some guy who got $2 million. So maybe you guys have an option too. Now, the next one I want to talk about is partnerships. It isn't exactly a funding source, but joining teams with your buddies can be one of those fruitful things that really pull off. It has downfalls too, where you're banging heads with ideas and you don't agree on one and the other guy wants this. There's some downfalls to it, but in my experience of developing games, I've met some really cool people, and given our projects are all kind of still in the works, we'll probably all join forces at some point, and maybe through all that we can figure out funding options. But it is something you can really speed things along by joining forces with a buddy. I would suggest you look at those options, find friends that you think are good hard workers, and I know several guys out there that I know I could trust. They wouldn't be sitting on their ass doing nothing while I do all the work. There's tons of people out there who are hard workers. Just avoid the ones that you know are lazy. But partnerships would be a great way to get your foot off the ground and put a game out in a faster rate. Maybe funding won't be so difficult at that rate. So consider that. Get some partners involved. That's an option for you too. Now, the next option for funding is is very popular. And I've seen in the Twitch community with developers that a lot of them will take maybe a little break off just to catch up on some freelance work, maybe selling some assets on the Unity Asset Store or the Epic Store. Those are options that people have explored, and you can make a quick buck here and there, especially if you're building something in your game. Why not prototype it into an asset and then throw it up on one of these stores? Maybe you make a few bucks. Who knows? It might just end up being your new job and you don't even make video games anymore. How many people have actually done that? Tons of people. They end up just abandoning their project and they become asset developers. Fantastic career, I would think. It's good money. I'm always buying stuff all the time for my games, so it is, we are consumers in some fashion. So, why not try that route? And if you can, maybe make a quick buck here and there just to support your game development a little bit further. So those are options out there for you as well. Now, self-funding is basically my favorite one. I'm completely biased, of course, because I've been self-funding this project from the start. But it is the safest. It is probably increased, I think, my rate of success by a huge percentage. I think all the other routes are very risky. This one has no risk at all. As long as you maintain your day job, like I work in probably a part-time fashion. I know some weeks are worse than others. And in my free time, I develop my game. I don't have to stress out over meeting contractual deadlines or having like weekly meetings with publishers to tell them how things are going, or having to follow some sort of like crazy agenda for some grant that I signed myself up for. So I like my self-funding options. I can make the game whatever way I want in whatever time frame I have. Unfortunately, I do have a pretty long development time, but at the same time, my game is a lot bigger than most indie games out there, and I'm doing it all by myself. It's super fun. I don't have any regrets. I think the self-funding route is your best option. My recommendation, if you're seeking to go the self-funding route, find a job that is a stay-at-home desk job, because it is the easiest to blend in this sort of work with. Perhaps you could have some sort of office space and maybe they let you work after hours. That was another option that I had in the early stages where I worked at a company and I would just stick around on the computer and work on it. So those are cool options for self-funding. Well, the next one I wanted to talk about is streaming and YouTube and those forms of marketing that you could generate some money through. I see a lot of developers who post on YouTube and do streams, and they do actually very well. I make a few bucks here and there through my Twitch, and I haven't really done much with YouTube. It's really hard for me to break through the algorithm, but one day it just kind of pops for some people, and all of a sudden they've got like 10K followers. YouTube is a great way to make money. Once monetization happens, and Twitch as well. Twitch actually is a decent one for me, and I only stream like once every week, and I get like $100 every couple months. I guess it's that, but I mean, if you were to invest more time into it, I don't really have the option to just sit there and stream all the time, but there are people out there who stream daily on their game development journey, and let me tell you, they probably make all right money. You can't go to the bank and apply for a mortgage with just that, but it's better than nothing. I'm completely funding this stuff myself, so look into those options if you're the type of person that doesn't mind a camera in front of their face or spending time making videos. It is a source of making some money, so something to consider when you are trying to find ideas for money. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about in funding is pre-sales and early access. These are options you could explore. By having it release early, it allows you to get the funds early. I would say that the amount you're going to get is probably going to be a little bit less than if you were to release it all in one big day. But we've got some great stories like Valheim, for instance, is still an early access success. The game was really fun even in that stage. So I think you need to evaluate how fun your game is if you are going to go that route. And like certain games like roguelikes do very well with it, or battle royales, they do very well in early access, just because you kind of get the fully encompassed game. And there's so many additions down the road that come with early access. When you compare it to a game like mine where it's a story, early access, I could probably pull it off in some sort of chapter-based version of a game, which I may explore. It's been an idea that I've just been thinking about. It's just a little harder, right? Because people will get to the end of that and they'd be like, well, now what? There's nothing to really do. Well, roguelikes, they have good repeat value to them, and Battle Royale is the same thing. So early access has really good options for certain games, and some other games like mine, they aren't so great. If I was to do early access, I think I would probably split things up in chapters and maybe release them 1 month at a time. But that's just a very stressful scenario, I think, if I didn't have things actually finished. So if I ever explore those routes, I think I'd probably have most of the game done, and maybe I'll try a different strategy. It is a source of funding if your game falls in that realm, so take a peek, make a decision. Maybe you can get some money that way. Now, some honorary mentions for options for funding. You could also build in some sort of digital currency or Bitcoin crap. Even ads are an option as well if you want to build in some ads. Don't suggest any of these routes because it's quite spammy, but in the iPhone and iPad app stuff, that's just littered with it. You know what I mean? They got timers for people to skip with money. So those are options for funding too. If you had some sort of early access model, you can maybe dig deeper into that. Even like product placement is another one. I don't know if anybody wants to put a product placement in my game, but send me some cash and I'll put a picture of your product or your face or whatever it is you want in there for a bit of money. Educational things are huge money, by the way. If you're looking to make some money before you go on your bigger project, consider looking at educational games. Lots of kids are playing that sort of stuff. Schools pick it up. Maybe they even sponsor you through grants. That's the kind of thing that Canadian Media Fund would probably really grease your wheel and get you going. They would probably sponsor that sort of thing. So it's an option for me. I think it's an option for you too. Education's big money. Don't forget things like Patreon. I have a Patreon as well. I've got several people contributing some monthly income for me. It's not much, but it always makes me feel happy in the end. And there are some developers out there who are, pulling in, hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month just through Patreon. So it is a platform that you can explore as well. Now, I may have missed a few, but I'm just kind of skimming through all this stuff right now. Let me know in the comments if you have any other suggestions for funding. There's always new and innovative ways that some of you guys out there have come up with ways of making money so you can produce your awesome game. I'd love to hear it in the comments below. Be sure to like the video and subscribe. I got more tips and even devlogs of my progress of the game that you can go and watch as well. So be sure to check all that stuff out, and hopefully see you guys in another video. Cheers.